My name is Cressa, and until that exact moment, I believed that marriage meant building a life based on mutual respect. I was standing in the sun-drenched kitchen of the beautiful property my parents had spent 2 decades sacrificing to secure for me. The paint was fresh, the floors gleamed, and the air smelled of new beginnings. But the peace didn't last. The heavy oak front door swung open, and the heavy footsteps of my husband Julian and my father-in-law Arthur echoed through the foyer. They hadn't called ahead. Arthur walked in as if he already owned the place, his sharp eyes evaluating the crown molding and the high ceilings with a calculating, greedy gaze. Julian followed closely behind, carrying himself with that artificial boldness that always appeared whenever his father was around to pull his strings. "Clara, look who's here," Julian called out, though his voice lacked any genuine warmth. Within minutes, the casual visit transformed into an aggressive, unannounced interrogation about the house logistics. Arthur didn't even congratulate me. Instead, he began adjusting the thermostat and criticizing the kitchen layout. He openly discussed how his other children would love the guest house, completely ignoring my presence. They had no idea that this house held a massive legal secret, one that my parents and my attorney had carefully crafted to protect me from this exact type of familial parasite. They genuinely believed that my inheritance was their new family playground. To understand the sheer depth of their greed, you have to understand exactly how this house came to be. Julian assumed we bought it using joint marital funds or some stroke of luck, but the truth was far more profound. This beautiful home was the culmination of 20 years of relentless, exhausting hard work by my own parents. They didn't come from money. My father worked double shifts at a local manufacturing plant, his hands permanently stained with industrial grease, while my mother managed a small home daycare, sacrificing her own peace every single day. Every spare penny they earned didn't go toward luxury vacations or expensive cars. It went into a dedicated fund meant solely to secure my future stability. Throughout our marriage, Julian's family had always looked down on my parents. Arthur, with his smug corporate background, routinely made passive-aggressive comments at holiday dinners, treating my family like second-class citizens because they wore blue collars. They sneered at their modesty, completely blind to the fact that my parents were quietly building a fortress of security for me. Before my father passed away, he and our family attorney placed the entire deed of this property under a highly specific, ironclad legal trust. It was designed with a single unyielding condition: the home belonged to me and me alone. It was completely insulated from any marital assets or outside claims. Julian and his father were standing in a house built on 20 years of sweat and tears that they hadn't contributed a single dime toward, yet their overwhelming entitlement made them believe they could simply walk in and claim it as their own. The atmosphere inside the kitchen shifted from uncomfortable to downright hostile. Arthur pulled a leather-bound notebook from his breast pocket and began walking down the hallway, tapping the walls with a pen. He was openly assigning the rooms, completely ignoring my presence as if I were a ghost wandering through my own home. "The master suite on the first floor will be perfect for me," Arthur announced, his booming voice echoing off the hardwood floors, "and the 2 upstairs bedrooms can go to Julian's brother and sister when they come down from the city for the holidays. The guest house out back will make a nice storage unit or an office for my consulting work." I stood by the granite island, watching this bizarre theatrical performance unfold. Julian didn't look at me once. Instead, he nodded rapidly along with every single demand his father made, eager to please the man who had controlled his entire life. The utter lack of respect, the complete violation of my boundaries, and the erasure of my parents' hard work hit me all at once. This was the exact breaking point. They hadn't contributed a single dollar, yet they were acting like conquerors dividing up spoils. Suddenly, Julian turned around and marched back into the kitchen, his posture rigid and his eyes filled with an unearned artificial authority. He looked at me with cold calculation, trying to assert total dominance in front of his father to prove he was the man of the house. He slammed his palm down on the counter, pointed at my purse, and shouted the exact words that sealed his fate: "Hand my dad the keys." He demanded total surrender, expecting me to bow down to their greed. The echo of Julian's hand slamming against the granite counter died down, leaving a heavy, suffocating silence in the room. Both men stood there staring at me, waiting for the tears, the arguments, or the inevitable surrender they were so used to receiving. But I didn't reach for my purse, and I didn't lose my temper. Instead, a wave of absolute clarity washed over me. I slowly stood up straight, smoothing down my skirt, and looked past my husband, locking my eyes directly onto my father-in-law's smug face. I took a slow, deep breath, smiled pleasantly, and delivered the calm, devastating sentence that flipped the entire power dynamic in a single second. Arthur, I'm glad you love the layout, but the trustees of my parents' private estate would have you arrested for trespassing before you ever unpacked a single box. The effect was instantaneous. Arthur's smug, entitled grin froze, and the color rapidly drained from his face until he went completely pale. His hand holding the leather notebook began to tremble slightly as the heavy legal weight of that one sentence crashed down on him. Julian's jaw literally hit the floor, his eyes darting back and forth between me and his father in utter confusion. He tried to speak, but only a hollow stutter came out. They suddenly realized they had no legal ground to stand on. They had completely overlooked the fact that this house was never a marital asset. It was an unassailable fortress tied to an ironclad private family trust. In their desperate rush to colonize my life and claim my inheritance, their absolute greed had completely exposed them, leaving them trapped with nowhere left to run. Arthur's silence was deafening as he struggled to find his breath. Julian finally found his voice, stepping forward with a mixture of panic and anger. What do you mean, trustees? What kind of private trust, Cresa? We are married. Everything we own belongs to both of us. That's the law. He was practically begging for reassurance, but I just maintained my calm smile. I walked over to the desk, pulled out a certified copy of the legal trust documents, and slid them across the granite island. I explained the exact legal framework my family attorney had established. This house was entirely protected, but the real trap wasn't just the trust. It was the specific prenuptial agreement Julian had signed years ago, without paying close attention to the clauses. My lawyer had secretly integrated a specific condition regarding financial coercion and asset protection. By attempting to forcibly claim this property for his father and family, and by shouting demands to surrender the keys in front of a witness as I had quietly pressed record on my phone minutes earlier, Julian had officially triggered a severe legal violation. The terms were clear. Any documented attempt at financial abuse or coercive control over my separate inherited properties would instantly invalidate his rights to any shared marital support and fast-track an asset-protective divorce separation. Julian's eyes raced across the legal text, his hands shaking as the realization hit him. His financial security, his comfortable lifestyle, and his entire future were now completely at risk. The predator had walked straight into a cage of his own making, and the door had just slammed shut. The arrogance that had filled the room just moments ago completely evaporated, leaving behind a thick wave of desperation. Arthur dropped his leather-bound notebook onto the counter, his knees visibly shaking as he sank into one of the bar stools. Julian looked at me, his eyes wide with a frantic, sweating panic. "Cresa, please," he stammered, stepping backward away from the documents. "We were just joking around. We were just excited about the new house. You can't seriously do this over a misunderstanding. We're a family." "Family doesn't plot to steal the roof over my head," I replied, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. I refused to back down even a single inch. I looked at both of them and delivered my final, unyielding ultimatum. They could either sign a voluntary, uncontested separation agreement that explicitly waived any future claims to my properties, or I would hand the audio recording and the trust documentation directly to my attorney to initiate full legal proceedings for financial harassment. Julian's father looked at his son, his face completely hollowed out by the sudden terrifying reality of public exposure and financial ruin. The grand illusion of their family dominance had utterly crumbled in less than 10 minutes. They were no longer the proud conquerors dividing up spoils. They were cornered schemers, desperately looking for an exit strategy to save whatever was left of their reputation. Julian slowly realized that his absolute compliance with his father's greed had cost him everything, including his standing in my life. The long, exhausting process of untangling my parents' hard work from their toxic entitlement had finally begun, and for the first time in years, I was the one holding all the power. 3 months later, the heavy cloud of their toxicity has completely lifted. Julian and his father signed the uncontested separation paperwork, realizing that fighting an ironclad trust would only expose their absolute greed to the world. Today, I sit peacefully on my beautiful back porch, watching the sunset cast golden light over the garden my parents would have loved. I am 42 years old, completely independent, and finally free from a family that only valued me for what they could take. My parents' 20 years of sacrifice weren't just for a house, they bought my freedom,